if you can find that healthy sort of equilibrium where you control what you can control, but you could also just let go of the things that are out of your control, then that's at least a much healthier place to live in terms of just your outlook on life, in terms of, getting up to face the day, knowing that you're at least doing everything that you can do as much as possible, and you kind of have to just surrender the stuff that you just can't control. And I had to learn just how to kind of quiet my mind. So I talked about meditation in one of my articles. I'm a terrible meditator. I'm not good at it at all, but it's something I continue to try day after day. I may not do it as well as somebody else, but even if I could have 5 to 10 minutes of just calm, even though I've been doing it for like 20 or 30 minutes, that little short burst of calmness can really have a positive impact on the rest of my day.
Chris, thank you so much for coming on. And, I've sort of been reading a lot about you, and the reason why I wanted to bring you on was because of the story you have, but also just from a standpoint of just sort of like, how can what you've been going through help other people, especially to the listeners of this, episode, especially when they're dealing with a lot of burnout, a lot of stress, a lot of mental health issues, maybe even depression. So I think that, what you've gone through by far is incomparable to what what my audience is doing right now, but I think there's definitely a lot of overlap and parallel. So maybe, do you want to just give a quick backstory on yourself, on who you are, on your sort of like lead up to creating the blog? And I think a lot of people should read the blog, by the way. I'll put it in the show notes, but just prefacing everything that we're going to speak about with how you came to be, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So my story really begins, at least for the purposes of this conversation, my senior year of high school. So just to kind of set the stage, I grew up in Connecticut, and for the first 18, 19 years of my life, I didn't even know that I had a muscle disease of any kind. I didn't have any symptoms. I played sports. And then my senior year of high school, I was in a car accident, and they determined that because of some blood work that had come back really strangely, that I had some sort of underlying condition. They weren't sure what it was. They knew that my protein levels were off the chart. So after about a year, I was diagnosed with something called limb-girdle muscular dystrophy type 2B. I know that's a mouthful. At the time, they weren't really sure what it was. It had a different name, but basically what it means is that I was missing a specific type of muscle protein that aids in muscle cell membrane repair. And over time, it was expected that I would eventually start to lose strength, to lose muscle function. But they weren't sure when that was going to happen, and kind of the expectation at that time, this was back in 2004, they thought that it would happen later in life. So I was told, don't worry about it until it starts to happen, but it's probably not going to happen until later in life. At that point, there should be some sort of treatment. So that was kind of the criteria that I was sort of operating under during my college years. I kind of knew I had it, but I didn't really think too much about it. And then shortly after graduating from college in 2008, I was moving to a new apartment, and I was carrying my desk chair up the stairs, and I noticed a strange feeling in my legs, like it was fatigue, but I wasn't tired. It's kind of hard to explain, but it just felt like my legs were sort of fatiguing and getting weaker before the rest of my body, and I thought that was very odd. And then another night I was going for a run after work, and I could see where I stopped a lot sooner than where I usually stopped on my run. I kind of knew and could see up ahead where I would, usually stop for my run, and I was stopping much, much sooner, hundreds of yards, hundreds of feet sooner. I'm not exactly sure the exact distance, but again, that same feeling in my legs of they were fatigued, they were tired, but the rest of my body wanted to keep going. And then, over the coming months and years, I started noticing other types of weakness. And then a doctor in Boston reconfirmed my diagnosis, except the problem was he told me no, it's not going to happen later in life. It's actually happening right now. And, you should expect to someday, probably within the next 10 years or so, you might not be able to walk anymore. So going from, okay, this might happen later in life to I'm going to be in a wheelchair in 10 years was a very difficult thing for me to process. Because I kind of expected my life to go in one direction, only to find out that it's going to turn out much differently from what I had expected. And that really changed and altered my outlook on life. As you can imagine, it was a very difficult thing for me to experience, to process, to accept. And for a long time, I didn't accept it. I just kind of buried my head in the sand. I kind of lived in denial, thinking, okay, there must be something that I can do. And I tried all sorts of different types of diets and eating certain things, not eating other things, taking supplements, trying to be very strategic about what exercise I did, but nothing worked. And then I kind of just got to a point where I was just dejected and it felt sort of helpless that this is going to get much worse. I started thinking in catastrophic terms, like my life was over, that, nothing that I wanted to be able to do in life I'd be able to achieve. I mean, things that in retrospect I know now are not true, but at the time, as I'm dealing with it, it was very difficult for me to deal with and accept. And a turning point for me was in 2013. I just, you kind of been operating under that paradigm for so long, you just get kind of tired of it. And I was just like, I need to move forward with life. I can't keep using this as an excuse not to, achieve my goals, achieve the dreams I still had. I could still live a full life. It just was going to have to look differently. So the first question I asked myself was, what can I accept that? And I'm like, I think I can, but I need to, kind of see it in action. So I started scoping out some of my goals and dreams that I had not yet achieved or accomplished. And I just wrote them down and just kind of inverted the problem and backtracked to say, okay, there's got to be a way to do this, given my circumstances, given what I know about my future progression of weakness. I have to be able to achieve them somehow. It's not going to look like the way that I thought it would, but there has to be a way to do this. And one of the big ones at the time was going back to business school, to go to business school, excuse me. And, I really just forced myself to figure out a way to make it work. I kept pushing it off every year, thinking, oh, there's no way I could do that. There's no way I could quit my job, go full time. And then I just got to a point where it was, this is kind of now or never. I'm not getting any younger. I'm not getting any stronger. Can I do this? And if so, how? And I really forced myself to lay out the steps of what that would entail. And I was able to make it work. I was able to actually go. I was able to do all the steps that I had scoped out. And it really gave me a lot of confidence that there were a lot of things that I could still do, that I could still, again, live a full life. And that really kind of was a turning point for me and a big confidence boost. And then ever since, I got invited to a conference shortly thereafter where I shared my story. I realized how much I enjoyed kind of taking what I've learned and then applying it to, other people's lives. Because there was a time where I was just writing in my own personal blog. I was writing about my journey, but I kind of got tired of doing that. And I really kind of wanted to shift into a mode of taking the things that I've learned and being able to share it with others. Because that there's a lot of people out there that are struggling in their own way. And that's actually what led me to start my Substack newsletter, Hello Adversity, this year, was kind of a realization that I had accumulated all this knowledge and wisdom, a lot of it through trial and error. And there's just a lot that I want to be able to share with other people, things that I think are obvious, because sometimes if you think about it all the time, you think it's obvious that everybody knows it. But I realized that wasn't the case, that there was a lot of stuff that I'd experienced that might be new to some people, or, to different audiences. They might not be exposed to this type of information, this type of thinking. And I also thought, if I could help somebody avoid the trial and error that I went through, I can tell them what worked, what hasn't worked. And hopefully maybe I can make somebody's journey easier, somebody's life easier, by helping them to avoid the things that they shouldn't be doing. So this year has been kind of my first year of running this newsletter. I didn't really know what to expect going in, but I've had a blast. It's been wonderful to connect with different people. And it kind of validated my hypothesis that there were people out there that, you know, would benefit from this type of content. It's not that I've, this super wise person that has all the answers. I don't, not even close. But I had always just written to a certain audience, to a certain group of, family and friends. But I'd always wondered, is this content, is this, my personal story, something that might be useful to other people? And I found that it has been. And in doing so, I've met so many wonderful people along the way. I got to meet you, Barry. I got to meet other people that are kind of in the similar boat to mine in terms of going through some sort of challenge, some sort of adversity. And I've really learned a lot from other people. And I love being able to learn something and then to immediately try to apply it. And then if I can, to be able to teach it to others. I try not to write about things that I don't also use myself or that I haven't thought myself. And, I've really enjoyed that. I think it's been certainly a learning experience running a newsletter. I've never done it before. I've never written consistently before. I've never thought in terms of having a readership before. It's always been kind of a family and friends type thing, but I've had an absolute blast.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that. I think you mentioned a couple of interesting points in the sort of like the backstory. I want to dig into the moment that you decided that it was like you didn't want to play the victim anymore. I think that's super critical, and it was probably a junction in your life where you could have gone two ways. One was obviously continue to feel sad and play the victim card and say, why is this happening to me? And then the other route was, well, yes, this is happening to me, but I can do something about it. I can take agency and I can actually do something with my life. How did you come across that? I think there's a lot of people out there who need to find that. There's a lot of people saying like, why me, why me? And certainly it's not fair. The world is unfair, but in many cases, these things happen to people. And when these things do happen to people, they don't necessarily have the self-awareness and the mindset to take them outside of their situation. What was the moment for you where you decided, okay, I can't keep doing this. This is going to ruin me, and then flip it on its head and invert it, as you said, and then figure out the path forward by taking more control of your life?
Yeah, I don't think that it was necessarily an epiphany where one day I woke up and I'm like, I think I figured out how to move forward. I think it was just kind of I just had gotten tired of just looking through life through one particular lens. It's so easy sometimes for us to internalize that whatever we're going through, for me, it's my disease. For other people, it could be something else. That we're the only ones that have something going on, that we're the only ones struggling with some sort of adversity. And for the longest time, I'd only chosen to look at what was wrong with me. I hadn't really taken time to perceive that others are going through their own struggles. And for me, it was just kind of a sense that I knew where I wanted to go, but I didn't know how to get there. I knew that I needed to find a way to kind of move forward. I had to accept that these are my circumstances. They're not going to change. And no matter how much I complain to myself about it, how much I, internalize all of that pain and frustration and disappointment, I could, feel that way for days and weeks and months, but afterwards it's still going to be there. Those circumstances are still going to be there. And it was on me to figure out what to do next. And, just those dreams had just been kind of percolating in my mind for so long. And I didn't think that they were possible. And it was really started out as an exercise of like, I'm going to find a way to do this, but it's just, can I do this? Is there even a path forward? And what I quickly realized is there was a path forward. And for so long, I'd been focused on the doors that had closed that I failed to see not only the doors that were still open, but also, new doors that had opened and new opportunities. And it really just took one validation. Could I do this one goal? Could I achieve this one goal? And for me, that was, again, going to business school and seeing that there actually was a path forward despite and taking into account, my present state of weakness and the future weakness I was going to experience, which would involve, potentially using a wheelchair at the time or different types of adaptive equipment. It was going to be very difficult, and I knew going in that it wasn't going to be easy, but if I could make it work, then that would be a humongous confidence boost for me. That would serve me well for years to come. That was kind of the bet that I took on myself. And that really was the case. I was able to do it, and then I saw, okay, I was able to make it work for this really difficult thing. Could I make it work in other realms? And I was able to think through other types of goals that I wanted to achieve, other things I wanted to do. And I was able to make that a possibility. To make that a reality rather than a possibility. But, it wasn't something that happened overnight. It was kind of a gradual realization. But I just believed deep down that there was some sort of way to make it happen. And I kind of knew also intuitively that I'd sort of gone completely in one end of the spectrum in terms of just becoming completely jaded, that it was time for me to sort of correct that a little bit. It's not easy. It's not something that you can just wake up saying, I know I need to be more optimistic, therefore I will be more optimistic. It's not that simple. Any of your listeners probably know that. You might know where you need to go, but just because you know you need to go there doesn't mean that it's that easy to get there. You still have to believe that it's possible. You still have to kind of see it for yourself that, you can make this work. And, that was just something that I kind of had to experience firsthand. Once it happened, I was able to, to sort of gain that confidence. Did that answer your question at all?
There's definitely, obviously it's not easy to get out of those situations. And, for me, I've sort of been there and back, but there's also, a lot of people out there who are trying to sort of figure out this from themselves. I think everyone's situation is different, obviously, but I think the framework to get there can be applied. And it sounded like for you, it wasn't like an overnight thing. It took a lot of thinking, a lot of, sort of figuring out exactly what the next steps were. You mentioned business school, which actually was probably a good goal. Maybe it was it's setting a goal that it was the fix to it, and trying to find and plan steps to get to that goal. And by doing so, you had an objective. You weren't waking up aimlessly every day. You had a purpose, and you wanted to do something from that. And I think that with adversity in general, there is this idea that it's only happening just to the individual level, because everyone is sort of like focused on themselves. And generally speaking, we are all pretty selfish at some point. We have to be in order to take care of ourselves. And when we do come across these situations in our personal lives, we think that everyone else is not going through adversity. Everyone is living their lives happily, and you're the only person, and that makes things even worse. So can you maybe just explain a little bit about the fact that, you're not the only person going through this? There are other people, and how you came to that realization?
I kind of distinctly remember that part when I had that realization. I was waiting in line at South Station in Boston. There's a sort of a lunch kiosk there. I was in line waiting to get my sandwich, and I just took some time to sort of observe the different people around me, because at that point it was rush hour and there was all sorts of people in the concourse. And I don't know if it was just me being hyper perceptive or it was just a perfect storm of just, I won't say of suffering around me, but there's just a lot of people at that time that kind of seemed like they were struggling in some way. There was a person sitting at a table that was just kind of staring at the ground, dejected. There was a woman that was walking by having a very animated phone call. Looked like she might have been crying. There's another guy sweating, trying to run to make his train that was about to leave. And it just got in my head, everybody has something going on. Everybody's dealing with something. And it kind of was as close to an epiphany as I have had, of just realizing, wait a minute, yes, my struggles, my circumstances are physical and they're out there for the world to see. It's clear that I struggle to walk, etc. But there's so many people that have their own issues that, although it may not be something that they can see, physically, they're dealing or struggling just as much, if not more, on the inside. And that was just a major wake up call for me that, yes, I have my issues. Yes, I have my problems, but I'm not alone in that. And for so long, again, I thought that I was the only person in the world that had a difficult life, even though deep down I knew that wasn't the case, but sometimes it just felt like that. And that really helped me to start to see that if I just took some time to, talk to people and you can kind of start to see that, okay, even people that say that they're okay, if you dig a little deeper, if you have deeper conversations and kind of know what to look for, that a lot of people are struggling underneath. And I don't mean that in a manipulative way, just, you have a conversation with somebody and, you can sense that, they might live the perfect lives on social media, but if you have a conversation with them, you can see that things are not always as great as they appear. And if there's any sort of silver lining from what I went through, was that a lot of my coworkers and friends, they understood what I was going through. They could see it firsthand. And then they started sharing things with me that I'm pretty sure they didn't share with anybody else in terms of their own struggles, their own physical issues, their own mental health issues. And I really began to realize that I was definitely not alone in, struggling and, worrying about the future and worrying about kind of the trajectory of my life, that everybody's kind of dealing with that. They might come at it from a different way, but they're definitely not okay, even when they look okay, on Instagram or something, that, a lot of people are really just kind of barely getting by. And that was a really big eye-opener for me, and that helped me to both contextualize what was happening to me, but also, we started talking about why did I start Hello Adversity. I started to think in those terms of, okay, I've been through this situation. I had to learn all these things the hard way. Is there something from my experience that I could extrapolate or that I could share with others that might be useful in their own lives? Even people with vastly different life circumstances than my own life experiences. There are things that I've learned and experienced that I think sometimes people don't know about, or they might know it, but they kind of just suppress it until someone kind of tells it to them. And that's happened to me too. I've learned things that, somebody phrases a certain way and it's like, oh, okay, that's kind of what I was thinking or feeling. And I'm really glad that they kind of shared their story and told me those things. And that's kind of became my goal as to, why I started this site, was to take some of these learnings and to be able to share it with other people, because of that realization that we're all struggling, we're all dealing with something.
But it was very stark for me to read that, because I too have sort of started to notice and becoming more aware of my surroundings. And one example was, and this is taking it to the extreme of, the stuff that's happening globally right now, the wars, the conflicts, right? And you can imagine the amount of pain those people are suffering. And, it's in it, then you compare that to what we are going through in daily life, and it's dwindling. Like, it's really humbling to know that, we're, for those who are listening to this, whether you're living in the US or Australia or the UK, you lived in a pretty well stable society. You have a job, you have family and friends around you. And there are people out there who are suffering in the Middle East, in Ukraine, and they're dying, right? And so it sort of puts a spotlight on that. And I know it's really hard to even think about that because it's so far away from our lives. But, the fact that people are around this world going through that, I think it puts a lot of perspective, as you mentioned, on where you are and what your life is, and knowing that, yes, we're all going through shitty times, but, there's definitely a path forward beyond that. And I think it's probably more of like a test, if anything, to see, how can you go beyond that and how can you better yourself and take agency and all those things. So I appreciate that, the fact that you spoke about that, and hopefully a lot of people will listen to this and sort of look back on their lives and understand what they're going through right now, and sort of just put into perspective relative to everything else that's happening around them in the world. In terms of sort of the stuff that you have, written about, I think it would be interesting just to learn more about some of the tactics or the mechanisms or the strategies you've used to deal with the adversity that you've come across. Right? You mentioned a couple of them. I'll probably let you explain a few of them that you use the most. But obviously, there's like meditation and all of those things definitely help in some way. But everyone's different. But maybe you can sort of just describe some of the techniques you've used personally, and that might be able to help other people sort of learn more about how they can deal with their own situations.
Yeah, I think there's multiple buckets of sort of strategies. There's thinking about, the idea of agency, the idea of controlling what you can control and taking positive steps towards doing that, but also letting go of the things that are out of your control. And then there's just basic sort of mind maintenance type strategies in terms of, helping to keep your mind at ease as much as possible. It's never going to be perfect, but, one of the things that I struggled with was, and I still do to some extent, is just feeling overwhelmed. So a lot of the things I talk about kind of touch on that in some ways, like how to make life more manageable. Because a lot of things, at times if I'm thinking about something in the future, I think my life's going to turn out one way, or as you said, with all the things that are happening in the world, it's very easy to just feel a sense of helplessness, to feel a sense of hopelessness, to feel like no matter what you're doing, it's just not going to be enough at the end of the day, so why even bother? And just over time, especially as I was getting weaker, that sense of idea that I had any control over what was happening in my life, well, I was lost because, I thought my life was going to go one way, and it's turned out that it's going to be dictated by my level of strength, which is only going to get worse. And that really made me feel like so much is out of my control. So we can start with the control aspect. I felt very helpless a lot of times because of all these things that were happening to me, and I didn't know how I was going to be able to, again, make something of my life, to be able to live a life that I was proud of, that I could still do all the fun things that I wanted to do, that I used to be able to do. And so I felt like a lot of times that things were just out of my control, and I was dwelling just on what was out of my control. It wasn't until I started being able to realize that through that exercise we were talking about earlier, that there was still a lot that was under my control. And the more I did that, the more I was able to validate that, okay, there are things that I can do that can have really positive impacts in my life. I was able to see that there was still so much that I could control. That yes, I couldn't control necessarily the trajectory of my disease, but I could control, my mind, I could control my job, I can control my sense of purpose, my family and friends I surrounded myself with, and that there was still all these things that I was able to do. And then it became, that I could write, that I could do public speaking, that I could do all these different things that could help to give my life a sense of purpose and hope. And all of that really helped to correct that sense of helplessness I felt before to a more helpful and hopeful equilibrium. And people to talk about it in terms of circle of control, circle of influence. There are things that are within your circle of control that you can control, and then there's things that are outside of your circle of control that are, or maybe I got those terms mixed up, but basically the point being, there are things that you can alter, that you can control in your own life. Your habits, your health to some extent in terms of what you eat and drink and sleep, the relationships you surround yourself with, that sort of thing. And then there's just the stuff that no matter what you do, you're just never going to be able to control it. And that's, for me, potentially the disease, but also just world events. It's the fluke things that happen every day that can turn your life upside down, that you don't even conceive of at the moment. There's all sorts of things that just you're never going to be able to control. And if you can find that healthy sort of equilibrium where you control what you can control, but you could also just let go of the things that are out of your control, then that's at least a much healthier place to live in terms of just your outlook on life, in terms of, getting up to face the day, knowing that you're at least doing everything that you can do as much as possible, and you kind of have to just surrender the stuff that you just can't control. So that was a huge help for me. And the second thing is, again, just learning how to become less anxious. I'm a very anxious person. I'm a worrier. I'm always going to be. I kind of have just accepted that. But there are things that I've been able to do to kind of quiet the level of anxiety that I'd been facing on a day-to-day basis. I've talked a lot about on my Unhill Adversity about, just I used to have panic attacks all the time. Not like full-blown ones, but just little mini ones where just the anxiety builds up. It just can become overwhelming, and then I can feel that tightening in my chest and just feels like I'm about to break out in cold sweat, and then I might pass out, that sort of thing. That's happened to me before where, I really felt like my life was just falling apart, and that became really overwhelming for me, and just the anxiety was just completely off the charts. And I had to learn just how to kind of quiet my mind. So I talked about meditation in one of my articles. I'm a terrible meditator. I'm not good at it at all, but it's something I continue to try day after day. I may not do it as well as somebody else, but, even if I could have 5 to 10 minutes of just calm, even though I've been doing it for like 20 or 30 minutes, that little short burst of calmness can really have a positive impact on the rest of my day. And then there's other types of strategies and techniques. I think I'd read about something called debug mode, which I had kind of stolen from a podcast I had listened to from, I think Naval Ravikant was talking on a podcast about how he runs his mind through debug mode sometimes, where he'll have thoughts and then he kind of just like lines of code, he'll kind of just look at it as it's happening in real time, just going, is this useful? Is this really something I need to be thinking about right now? And I started doing that too, where my mind's going haywire, my mind's going a mile a minute, and I just kind of slow my mind down, just actually analyzing the thoughts in my mind and then going, why am I thinking about this? This is especially useful when you're trying to sleep. That seems to be when a lot of people have all sorts of thoughts throwing through their minds. That happens to me. I'm just like, why am I even thinking about this thing that's going to happen a week from now? I don't need to be thinking about this right now. I can just kind of stop. I can go to sleep. I can worry about it tomorrow. It'll still be there. I don't have to solve it right now anyways. And that's really been a helpful exercise for me too. And then kind of tangential to that is this idea of what I call the parking lot, which is just kind of a brain dump, a mind dump of sorts, where if a thought is in my head, something I don't want to forget, but I shouldn't be dealing with it right now, or if I'm working on something and I'm really trying to focus and a thought pops in my head that I want to at least capture, I write it down, and then I give myself a dedicated time per week to kind of go through that list. Some of the stuff is worth following up on. A lot of the stuff was just, might have felt important at the moment, but really just wasn't useful, and I could just kind of discard it. But that way it at least gives me a way to at least capture the thoughts, but not to have to deal with it at the moment. Because if you try to do that, you're not going to get anything done. And for so long, I would do that. I'd be working on something, a thought would pop into my mind, and then I'd Google it, and then 20 minutes would pass, and then I'd forget what I was working on, and just be this... it's very unproductive. And I learned to just acknowledge the thought, write it down, but not to have to deal with it at the moment, and then give myself a dedicated time every week to go through it. And that was really, really helpful for me to, again, take some of those thoughts in my mind, the thoughts that would normally stir up anxiety, and to give it a place to outside of my brain where I could address it later. And all of those things combined, and there's other strategies and tactics too that have really helped to give me back a sense of control. Again, we were talking about, circle of control before. What are the things that I can control? I can control those little types of habits that can help to calm my mind. I may not be able to solve, everything on my own, but if I can at least do these little habits, these little tactics every day, I can at least help myself stay in a much better frame of mind so that I can accomplish some of the more important things and more meaningful and purposeful things. And to be able to do that and be present also for, family and friends, rather than kind of always thinking about what I'm going to be doing next, which is something I fall prey to sometimes.
You mentioned the panic attacks, and the reason I want to go back to that is that, these panic attacks, sometimes people know about them, not everyone is able to experience it, and sometimes it's a bit misunderstood as well. Can you describe, what are some of the triggers for some of your panic attacks, and when you sort of break out into these sweats, how do you deal with them? Because I can't imagine someone going through this type and probably on a daily basis, or probably more frequent than that. Uh, you know, maybe shed some light on what that panic attack looks like for you personally.
Yeah, thankfully it doesn't happen nearly as often as it used to happen, but I'm always prone to them. Like if I'm, it's not to say that they're gone for good. They've come back in the past. They've come back, even this year, but they don't happen as often as they used to happen. But I think for me, it kind of it stemmed from, again, that feeling of being overwhelmed, of all of these worries that I had, all these things that were going on, that loss of control, that feeling that I just was kind of helpless, and that there's just nothing I could do to take action. I lost my sense of agency, that all these awful things are happening. That was kind of the precursor. That's kind of what led me to that point. And then, because when that happens, your heart starts to race. You start to, at least for me, my heart starts to race the more that I think about the anxiety, the more I think about the fact that I am even having anxiety is itself anxiety inducing. And then it kind of just snowballs from there, where my breathing would become shallow. It would, I wasn't really able to take deep breaths. I could feel this tightening in my chest. And all of those things combined, all of a sudden you start to see stars. You start to get a little lightheaded and woozy. I don't know if this is the case for everybody that goes through them, but that's how it was for me. Other precursors would just, a lot of that happened when I was very tired and fatigued. And I had not gotten a good night's sleep for several nights, or it had been a long day. That's kind of when some of those negative thoughts tend to crop up and really start to materialize in your mind, and you just don't have the energy of the defenses to be able to, kind of beat them back. And, it lasted for a few minutes each time. The more it happened, perversely, the more used to it I got, in the sense that I knew how to at least get out of it quicker. So that, if it happens now, for example, which it still does from time to time, I at least now can identify those symptoms, and I can almost talk myself out of it, kind of like the debug mode from before, where it's just like, okay, I've just been very anxious. I'm starting to have a panic attack. I'm starting to notice the symptoms. Something that I refer to in one of my pieces as the Vise, which is kind of a stupid name, but I'd read something where if you name your stress, if you name your anxiety, you can kind of have control over it. And I started to do that. I didn't really know what to call it. I just called it a vice, because it felt like a vice was sort of crushing me, pressing in on my chest. And, it might sound silly, but even something like that, just you kind of know it and you identify it. You say, okay, this is a panic attack. I feel that vice-like sensation. And then it's just like, okay, I'm feeling this way. What do I know can get me out of it? Just really focusing on my breathing, slowing down my breathing, trying to take deep breaths, trying to remember, it's like, I've been through this before. I'll be okay. Thinking positive thoughts. Because everybody's like, oh, you should think positive thoughts. And it's like a magic cure-all, but it's not. But, even just trying to reorient your mind away from the things that give you anxiety will help you get through it quicker. And, thinking about all the things in my life, my family, my friends, all the things going for me, my sense of purpose, my faith, all of these things that really help to ground me and remind me that, my life does have value. My life is not, completely off the rails. Because a lot of the times in the beginning, when I started having them, I thought that my life had just gone completely undone. And I know for the fact that that's not the case now. So all of these things don't immediately fix it, but it helps to get me through it quicker. And I can probably, maybe it takes 50% less time now to kind of go through it. And I can get back to a sense of, my heart's still racing, but I can at least breathe again. And really the key is to be able to breathe again. If you feel like you're not suffocating, then you at least feel like there's a way through it, a path. I try to drink a glass of water. I try to, listen to some soothing music or something. That really helps to sort of bring me back to the present moment, back to reality. Because your mind, and I know many of your listeners probably the same way, your mind can go haywire sometimes, and it just, like, you lose control, you don't know where it's going, and you just want to get it back, but it's not that easy. And again, this is one of those things through trial and error and through just hard experience. I've learned how to, if not overcome it perfectly, at least be able to manage it and at least be able to react and fight back. And at least that gives me confidence, even as I'm going through it, of knowing that it's going to get better. It'll take a little bit of time, just restore my breathing, and then we can go from there. And then, maybe after 20 minutes, a half hour, I'll say I'm back to normal, but at least I'll know that it's kind of has passed. And I can be like, even though I can't control why it's happening or kind of how it starts, I do see more and more that I can get through it, and that all the things that I kind of turned to in that dark moment when it was happening are exactly the things I just need to be focusing on to begin with. And that's kind of in a positive way, that's sort of a good, healthy reminder to focus more on those things to begin with, to restore that sense of proportion, to restore that sense of perspective, and to get through it.
What was for for me specifically, just before, I talk about the next thing, is just me, myself, and knowing so many other people going through this as well. Especially, you mentioned the haywireness. Everyone has that monkey mind where they're trying to do multiple things. They're trying to project out into the future, the next week. If they need to, hire people, they need to raise money, and there's so many things that are happening in their lives and in their mind that it can be very stressful and very overwhelming. I find that for me, it does get me to a point of anxiety, and I, for one, have started to meditate. I'm probably much worse than I am at it than you are, and it's hard. I think it does take practice, but
it's a low bar for me.
It definitely has benefits, but I'm yet to see those long-term benefits, and I'm just trying to at least take some action every day, 15-20 minutes of just just closing my eyes and really just not thinking about anything and just settling the waters a little bit, because you can there's a lot of waves that are crashing over the day, and you just feel it's not sustainable, at least for me. So I think that it definitely helps me get through those big moments. And the other thing was just what I want to learn is from you. You've gone through such an incredible series of events leading up to what you're doing now. Is there anything you can say that just to speak to, what have you learned from all of this? And, whether it be the tribulations of, the disease, it could be the sort of the strategies that you've been using, and sort of learning more about yourself as an individual. Have you learned anything about yourself over these many years in dealing with this?
I've learned a lot of things. I probably at a macro level, I've learned that I'm definitely a lot more resilient than I ever thought I was. In the beginning, again, I was very reactive and I didn't handle things well, and it was overwhelming, and they were all natural thoughts. I mean, it's not like I, should be at fault because I felt that way, but I didn't give myself credit that I could get through it. And it just came through experience of just the more I saw myself just enduring what I was going through, adjusting, I began to see that, okay, I'm a lot stronger mentally and emotionally than I gave myself credit for. And it helped to compensate for the loss of strength physically. And then I also learned that sometimes too, we discount our own stories. We discount our own points of view. we don't think that our experience or our wisdom is worth sharing. We don't think we have a story that's worth telling. And for the longest time, I didn't think I had that, special of a story or that interesting of a story that would even be on a podcast right now. But over time, I began to realize that I had accumulated a lot of experience, a lot of hard-earned wisdom. I mean, I'm not wise. These are things you just learn along the way that life kind of teaches you. And I realized that I had a lot to share, a lot to give to others. We were talking before about, helping people in different situations because we're all going through something. And I learned that I did have a lot of experience that might be useful to the world. I don't like being an inspiration. A lot of people say, oh, you've got such an inspirational story. And I don't want to be that kind of person that's just looked at as, here's this inspirational person we're going to, bring on to speak, or we're going to use as some sort of example of, our lives are tough, but at least we're not him. That's the kind of stuff I've always bristled at. No one's done that to me, but there's always that risk. But I've always found that if I could at least share my experience in a way that's useful to people, and if I could actually inspire them to change their lives, to look at life in a different way, to make them realize that they're not alone in what they're going through, then, that's the best use of my story, the best use of my perspective. And realizing I had that perspective was such a huge learning for me. And I got a huge confidence boost that, wait a minute, I just went through 10, 15 years of awfulness, but now I'm on this other side of it. I'm still going through it, but, I've accumulated all of this perspective about life that might actually be useful to people. And I've heard from people that it has been, and that's been very gratifying for me. And that was definitely an eye-opening experience as well, because for so long I just didn't think that there was anything practical or useful to come out of this, other than just my life is one of just constantly enduring hardship and suffering and whatnot. And to realize, wait a minute, this actually might have some sort of benefit for people. It was really a big paradigm shift for me and a big learning. One of the silver linings to come out of this is the experience.
I think, yeah, I mean, first and foremost, that's definitely, the fact that I was able to connect with you, and now that you're speaking about your experiences with me and hopefully with more people's, really, really amazing in and of itself, but also the fact that you've gone through all of this and, you get stronger. I think that's probably the other thing as well. It's like, for a lot of people, they can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and they're sort of underwater for a lot of it. But eventually, if you look deep enough, you'll be able to find it. And I think it sounds like, at least from my experience as well, just like continuing to push and take action every day and take agency and be able to develop a suite of strategies and methods to deal with it. I think you can actually do so much with that and really come out of it much stronger. And for a lot of people out there, I think there's definitely a lot of stuff that they can take from this episode and sort of apply it to their lives. And it may not necessarily have to be, oh, you're building a company, you're an entrepreneur, but just in general, whether it be family issues, it could be personal issues themselves, relationship issues. Everyone is going through tough times. And so I think if they can take what they've learned today and apply it, I think that's a win for at least this episode. But also in terms of your future plans, what are you hoping to do in the next year or so? You've got a blog, Hello Adversity. You've got, other things going on. Do you want to just talk about some of plans that you have for the next couple of years, or maybe shorter than that, about what you hope to achieve?
Yeah, my goal this year was to start Hello Adversity and then just see if I could grow it, to see if I could write consistently, and thankfully I've been able to prove to myself that I have. The goal next year is to kind of build off that momentum, to continue to write, continue to learn and to share what I've learned, to open myself up to new opportunities, and really see where it can take me. Again, I kind of started with modest goals when I began. I didn't know what was a realistic goal, and I've proved that to myself at least that there is sort of a yearning for this type of content, whether it's from me writing it or other people. I think there's just a lot of people these days looking for, I think, just different strategies and resources to help them get through the day. Just little things that they could do to make their lives just a little bit better, a little bit more manageable. And, I enjoy kind of, I'm just one person, but I enjoy the opportunity to be able to share that and to help people even just a little bit, make their lives easier. And so my goal for next year is to build off of that, to continue to grow Hello Adversity. I'm working on a few different writing projects. I'm working on I tell people I'm working on a memoir. It's coming slowly. I feel like the more people I tell, the more it'll force me to actually finish it. But I wanted to write about my experience from when I first started having symptoms through pretty much the year that I graduated from business school, to just kind of share that 8 to 10 year period of transformation, all the things that I learned from what I didn't do well to what I did well, or learned how to adjust to do well. And then just, I'm fine with my plans. That I forget who said it. I apologize, I can't remember the person who said it, but just, I'd heard that the best plans are the plans that allow you to change your plans. Meaning, you can make plans, but so many times they go haywire. You do it so far into the future that so many different things interfere that all of a sudden you're left with a sense of direction, and you don't know what to do next. And for the longest time, I made those plans, and my plans would always get thwarted. And I've learned to kind of have a direction of where I want to go, but give myself enough flexibility where if something happens health-wise with me, or something else comes up that I didn't anticipate, or even a better opportunity that I hadn't even thought of or conceived of, that, to give myself that leeway to be able to experience that and to go through it without my plans completely derailing. So I'm open to the fact that there's still a lot that I don't know in the future, what's going to happen to me health-wise, and also what other opportunities might pop up that I haven't thought of today. But, I am open to just continuing to try to grow the site, grow the newsletter, maybe even start a podcast of my own, I don't know. But I do enjoy meeting people. I do enjoy interacting with people. I do enjoy sharing these stories, my story, other people's stories, these different tools and strategies with other people that need them. Because again, I think it's something that we can all benefit from. And it really gives me a sense of purpose. So I know that at least whatever my future plans are, I want to still be doing that in some way. I really enjoy it. I had left my job earlier this year actually to pursue writing full-time and to take some time off to just kind of consider some of these bigger life issues of just, where do I want to go? Is this something that I enjoy doing? Is this something I want to turn into potentially a career? And I found that at least this is definitely something I want to continue doing in some capacity. That's really been a nice boost of confidence for me, especially since it's something, again, I've been thinking about for so long and had been putting off starting a newsletter until this year. I'm just like, I'm just going to do it. See what happens. Start small. If it's just myself, my mom, and a bunch of burner email addresses to get my subscriber base up, so be it. But thankfully, I've gotten the opportunity to meet a lot of people and to people that I had never met before. So for so long, every time I'd been doing writing in the past, it was always people I'd known, family and friends, and their immediate networks. But now I have the opportunity and the platform to be able to meet people from all around the world, which is really exciting.
No, I mean, that's great. And kudos to everything that you've done. And I also appreciate the fact that you actually decided to write a blog. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking now. And you just never know exactly what may transpire over time. And also the fact that you just took action. I mean, generally for a lot of people, they have this grand plan and vision, but they just don't act. and the fact that you just got to take one step at a time every day, and see it through, and eventually you'll start to see those sort of like marginal gains come through, which is great. And it sounds like everything's worked out for you, at least for at least up until this point, with regards to the Substack, to connecting with people, to speaking at conferences. So massive kudos to everything that you've done, but also the fact that you've been able to share your story as well with me and a lot of these people. I hope that they get a lot out of it. What would be the best way for people to connect with you?
I think by subscribing to my newsletter. I'm not super active on social media. I do have a LinkedIn. I also have an Instagram, which is just hello adversity. I think it's hello_adversity. I'll probably have to double check, but that's really kind of the best way to reach me. If they want to send me an email or something, it'd be helloadversity@substack.com, forwards to my personal Gmail account. I always love interacting with people. I try to answer any questions that anybody might have. I think if that's probably the best way to do it.
Got it. Well, arguably, Substack is becoming more of a social media platform nowadays, so maybe you are becoming more socially has a strong affinity, at least with Substack, which is actually a very it's a good community to be part of. There's a lot of it's not your run-of-the-mill Instagram or Facebook, anything like that. So I think there are specific types of communities to belong to, and I think Substack is a great one for that, and the following that you've been able to build for yourself. But in any case, thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate you coming on, and hopefully, I'll put all the links and show notes in sort of ways to connect with you in the show notes below. But really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.